The European Union is about to pass a regulation that could force tech companies to install a system able to scan everything we say online, including messages we thought were safely end-to-end encrypted. Yep, you heard that right. One of the most fundamental guarantees of our digital lives is on the chopping block. This is serious business, and you deserve to know what's at stake. Some people will say this video sounds alarmist, but the official EU documents I've read are crystal clear. What's brewing in Brussels could redefine or straight up wreck Europe's digital future. Our privacy and our most personal conversations are on the line. In Switzerland, a draft law provides for the systematic storage of metadata for all users. In the UK, an age verification system is slowly forcing every citizen to show ID just to view certain content, and London is in a standoff with Apple over encryption. Little chunks of freedom disappear every day, one temporary essential measure at a time, all feeding the same trend toward tighter digital control. Now the EU is kicking things up a notch with a never-before-seen mass surveillance plan, wrapped in the feel-good packaging of protecting kids. Enter chat control and the roadmap for legal access to data. Two friendly-sounding labels hiding a very clear political goal: to scan, analyze, and potentially decrypt every last one of our private messages. Texts, photos, videos, intimate conversations, everything would be run through opaque algorithms built by private companies and used by government agencies. The selling point is bulletproof, fighting child sexual abuse. But if we give in to protect the children today, what happens tomorrow? Counterterrorism will push the bar even higher. Then it'll be fraud, cyberbullying, and eventually political dissent. Who can promise this machine, once it's live, won't be turned into a censorship tool? Officially, the target is the spread of child sexual abuse material, CSAM, but the method raises huge red flags. Every messaging platform, including end-to-end encrypted ones like Signal, WhatsApp, Telegram, iMessage, or Proton Mail, would be forced to auto-scan users' private messages. This proposal didn't just appear out of thin air. Back in 2020, an EU communiqué spearheaded by Home Affairs Commissioner Ylva Johansson laid the groundwork. Behind her, Europol, specialized NGOs like Thorn, and private companies that build detection tools such as PhotoDNA or Safer. After several rounds of consultation, the draft law was officially unveiled in May 2022. Since then, heavyweight member states, France, Germany, Spain, Poland, have been lobbying hard to push it forward. A final vote is expected in late 2025 or early 2026. And remember, we're talking about an EU regulation, the Union's most powerful binding legal weapon. Once adopted, it takes effect in every member state as is, no wiggle room, even where national constitutions explicitly safeguard the secrecy of correspondence or the right to use encryption. Behind the warm and fuzzy slogan of protecting kids, chat control ushers in a seismic tech shift: client-side scanning. From the moment this system is active, your own phone or laptop acts as a 24-hour surveillance sensor. The scan kicks in before any end-to-end encryption, so the snooping starts long before your text, photo, or video is even on its way. Unlike a traditional wiretap that targets one suspect with a judge's signature, this setup scrutinizes every message from every user. The presumption of innocence flips on its head. By default, everyone is treated as a potential perpetrator. Here's what actually happens under the hood. First, the content you're about to send is silently compared right on your device against gigantic libraries of known child sexual abuse material, often labeled CSAM in EU paperwork. Immediately afterward, a second layer of machine learning code kicks in to look for grooming, meaning an adult coaxing a minor online, or for any new problematic images the system thinks it spots. No human sees the conversation at this stage. A black box algorithm simply fires off an alert to law enforcement if it decides something looks suspicious. That automated judgment call is where things get hairy. An AI model that was trained on the wrong data or simply doesn't understand the context could flag a harmless family beach snapshot or a couple of teenagers DMS. One misfire is enough to drop you into a police database, setting off investigations, apartment searches, even arrests. Every messaging platform operating in Europe would have to comply, including services famous for airtight encryption like Signal, WhatsApp, Telegram, iMessage, and Proton Mail. The scan happens on your device before the encryption layer, which means every conversation is inspected, even though it still travels through the network in scrambled form. Proponents insist privacy is preserved because the inspection stays local to your device, but embedding surveillance software right inside your phone doesn't make the spying benign. It simply hides the intrusion, rendering it invisible, incredibly hard to audit, and almost impossible to disable. The next concern is control. Who actually owns and runs this machinery? Not the European Union itself. The project is outsourced to private firms such as Thorn, bankrolled by Amazon, Google, and Microsoft, alongside Microsoft's PhotoDNA, Google's in-house scanners, and Safer. All of these tools are proprietary and closed source. Nobody outside the companies knows the code, the training data, or the real-world error rates. Yet their opaque verdicts can ignite criminal proceedings and upend lives. Consider iOS and Android, together powering the overwhelming majority of smartphones worldwide. Apple or Google could roll out these scanners with a seemingly innocent operating system update. Overnight, billions of devices would be running the surveillance code without notice, consent, or meaningful oversight. Contrary to the rosy marketing, users would see no on-screen indicator, have no off switch, and get zero transparency about how their private moments are being judged. So why are Apple and Google stalling, at least on paper? It's not because they suddenly fell in love with privacy. They know the second a backdoor opens in Europe, governments in China, Russia, or Iran will line up for the same deal. They also know their brands, and therefore their business models, run on trust. Turn iPhones or Androids into officially sanctioned spy gadgets and millions of users will bolt for alternative systems. Still, that resistance has a ceiling. Once a binding EU regulation lands, remember, we're talking about a market of 450 million consumers. Even Silicon Valley's biggest players might cave. The likely outcome would be Europe-only versions of iOS and Android, factory-equipped with the surveillance hooks Brussels demands. Europe would morph into a real-world test lab for full-scale mass monitoring. Chat control, though, is only the tip of the iceberg. In June 2025, the European Commission unveiled its vision for the future of encryption in an innocuous-sounding paper titled Roadmap for Legal Access to Data. Behind that bland label sits a far broader ambition. The document isn't just about snooping on future messages, it aims to make every bit of our digital past, present, and future decipherable. The goal is stated outright. By 2030, Europol must possess next-generation decryption powers. To get there, the roadmap bankrolls supercomputers designed to crack today's ciphers, ramps up advanced cryptanalysis research, and, most alarmingly, pressures companies to weaken their own security. In other words, Brussels no longer wants workarounds. It plans to soften encryption at its source by baking in flaws, so no data can dodge official eyes when the authorities come knocking. That strategy rides on several technical levers. One is the return of blanket telecom data retention, already struck down multiple times by the EU Court of Justice, reintroduced under a supposedly fundamental rights-compliant wrapper. Another is cross-border legal interception, letting police in one member state spy on communications in another without a local judge, slicing into judicial sovereignty. A third lever is the rise of digital forensics, government-authorized malware that slips in through known vulnerabilities to harvest data straight from devices. All of these measures converge on a single outcome: normalization. What used to be exceptional would turn routine. What once required narrow warrants would become automated, industrial, ordinary. Several member states have already caught the message and are gearing up for the transition. France is one of the loudest cheerleaders for chat control today, yet it already tried and failed to ram through a homegrown version of the very same idea. In March 2025, while pitching an anti-drug trafficking bill, Interior Minister Bruno Retailleau demanded direct access to the encrypted messages that flow through WhatsApp and Signal. It wasn't, he claimed, a backdoor, but a front door. Every message would be silently duplicated and forwarded to an authorized third party, in plain English, the state, turning the government into a ghost participant in your private chats. The blowback was immediate. Cybersecurity experts, civil liberties groups, and even lawmakers shredded the plan as a hidden vulnerability that would weaken encryption for everyone. The measure was tossed, and Retailleau eventually admitted it wouldn't fly. What France couldn't grab on its own, it might soon pick up through Brussels. Once chat control becomes EU law, Paris won't need another bruising national debate. Officials can just shrug and say, hey, it's European law. The proposal that was ditched in the name of fundamental freedoms would sneak back in through the side door at zero domestic political cost. Now enter the Roadmap for Legal Access to Data. The title sounds harmless, the contents are anything but. Brussels touts innovative solutions to balance security and fundamental rights, selling us the oxymoron of weakened encryption that still keeps you safe. That's like drilling a hole in a safe while promising it stays unbreakable, a glossy, bureaucratic fairy tale coming straight from the EU's power center. To crack encryption, the plan dusts off methods once reserved for military intelligence and extends them to everyday civilian use. Key escrow tops the list. Every provider of encrypted services would have to store a copy of users' decryption keys. The scheme died in the 90s during America's crypto wars, yet it's back in stealthier form. The promise is impossible. Keep ultra-sensitive keys perfectly secure forever. Cybersecurity history is a parade of massive leaks, databases, logins, even critical infrastructure. Naval groups' trade secrets have already spilled onto the internet. Imagine the fallout if millions of Europeans' decryption keys went public. That wouldn't merely violate privacy, it would gut the entire nervous system of our digital lives. On top of weakening the math, the roadmap pushes hardware and software level workarounds. Manufacturers could be forced to bake backdoors directly into processors, operating systems, or firmware. With those trapdoors in place, authorities would be able to reach into any device, skim data, switch on the camera or mic, or grab location feeds. Every smartphone becomes a potential snitch, every laptop a state-sponsored Trojan horse. Which leads to the obvious question, who can guarantee these holes stay in good hands? The honest answer is no one. The moment a vulnerability exists, it's reusable by a rival state, a criminal crew, or an authoritarian regime. A hole is a hole. Once it's there, anyone, including the very actors we claim to fight, can exploit it. Data collection is only the first stop. Next comes automated AI processing, supposedly able to pull weak signals of criminality from oceans of data. Trained on opaque police datasets, these algorithms claim they can predict threats, map criminal networks, and flag suspicious behavior. In reality, they work like black boxes. The public has no clue about their exact criteria, their training biases, or how they connect the dots. The fallout is a cascade of false positives that can trigger raids or arrests based on nothing more than a probability score spit out by a machine, one that, of course, faces no criminal liability. Welcome to predictive justice, a system built less on proven facts than on algorithmic guesswork. Behind the feel-good talk about protecting kids, an opaque ecosystem is locking into place, blending private profit, political agendas, and industrial ambitions. Mass surveillance isn't just a societal project. It's a monster market opportunity. Take Thorn, the non-profit co-founded by actor Ashton Kutcher. On paper, it defends children, but in practice, it sells detection tech that major platforms already use. Thorn's lobbying in Brussels, front and center with Commissioner Ylva Johansson, pushes to make these tools mandatory. If the EU signs off, Thorn and its backers, Amazon, Microsoft, Google, would grab an almost guaranteed monopoly over a captive market of hundreds of millions of users. A program marketed as a humanitarian breakthrough doubles as a commercial windfall. The line between protection and predation has never been thinner. Private companies driven by profit, shaped by their own tech biases and strategic goals, are being handed the powers of the sovereign, monitoring, surveillance, reporting. Their algorithms become automated cops. Google has spent years perfecting behavioral analysis and predictive detection systems tailor-made for a chat control world. Fed by data from billions of users, its models could morph into new police profiling tools. At that point, the issue isn't just ethical or democratic. By outsourcing surveillance to U.S. giants, Europe builds its own strategic dependence. Those firms fall under U.S. law, including the Cloud Act, which lets Washington demand access to data stored abroad, so American authorities could claim the trove of information on EU citizens. In the name of protecting children, the Union may be punching a hole in its own digital sovereignty and quietly sliding the keys to outside powers. The child protection pitch works like moral blackmail. Who dares oppose a measure framed as vital for the most vulnerable? Yet beneath the emotional rhetoric sits a shaky and deeply troubling technical reality. Independent studies show that roughly 80% of alerts generated by these systems are false positives. 4 times out of 5, the AI gets it wrong. Family beach snaps mistaken for child sex abuse material. Teen chats read as grooming. Educational content flagged as illicit. That flood of errors does more than bog down police. It creates a climate of perpetual suspicion where any ordinary action can turn a citizen into an algorithmic suspect. We're no longer presumed innocent, just possibly guilty until a machine says otherwise. The paradox is obvious. Seasoned child predators already know how to slip past systems like this. They can encrypt their files before sending them, jump to quieter channels, or tweak images just enough to fool the detectors. All well-documented tricks anyone can look up. The people who end up cornered are ordinary users who have nothing to hide yet value their privacy. They're suddenly exposed to a form of surveillance they don't understand, can't inspect, and can't switch off. EU Commissioner Ylva Johansson unwittingly summed up the whole standoff when she said, "Privacy advocates make a lot of noise, but someone has to speak for the children." That line pits 2 values against each other, privacy and child protection, as if they were mutually exclusive. It's a false dilemma that ignores a core democratic truth. Privacy isn't some outlaw luxury or hacker vanity. It is a fundamental freedom that shields free expression, whistleblowers, journalists, lawyers, victims, activists, and political opponents. In other words, it's one of the guardrails that keeps government power in check. Opposing chat control is not the same as refusing to protect kids. It's refusing to do so at the expense of 450 million Europeans' privacy when better, more targeted, rights-respecting methods already exist. Europe could pour real money into specialized investigative units, tighten rule-bound cooperation with platforms through manual reports, non-intrusive in-house detection, and judge-approved, narrowly scoped warrants, and focus on prevention, long-term training for children, parents, and teachers about online risks and warning signs, plus victim-side tools like stronger filters, beefed-up reporting channels, counseling support, and in-school verification programs. Tying security to blanket surveillance does the opposite of making us safer. It exposes the entire population to constant monitoring while savvy criminals keep slipping through. At stake is more than the rights of suspects. It's the very architecture of the rule of law. Deliberately weakening encryption undermines all communications because the backdoors created for police inevitably get pried open by cyber crooks or authoritarian regimes, turning digital security into an illusion. Economically, European cybersecurity firms would be trapped in a contradiction. How do you sell strong protection when the law forces you to build in flaws? The resulting collapse of trust would gut competitiveness and could sideline an entire strategic sector. Rolling out mass surveillance infrastructure would upend Europe's already fragile digital ecosystem, with cascading fallout for our rights, our safety, and our economy. Encrypted messaging services once looked to Europe, especially after the Snowden leaks, because the continent seemed serious about fundamental rights. Now they're threatening to bail. Signal says it would rather pull out than bake in surveillance code. Proton Mail, Tuda, and the rest would almost certainly follow. Europe would be kneecapping itself, wrecking the very privacy ecosystem it helped create. The social and political fallout runs even deeper than the tech or the economics. Blanket surveillance, even when it's automated, changes how people behave. Knowing that every text, photo, and chat might be inspected produces a chilling effect. Use self-censor, sidestep touchy topics, weigh each word. Free speech doesn't vanish overnight, it erodes quietly. For some professions, the new environment would be flat-out incompatible with their mission. How does a lawyer protect client privilege if their calls are scanned? How does a doctor keep telehealth confidential? How does a journalist shield a source or whistleblower? Chip away at those pillars and the whole architecture of democracy starts to wobble. Privacy isn't a personal luxury. It's a form of resistance, the very glue of trust, a core guarantee in any rule of law society. Researchers, lawyers, activists, and engineers, often on their own, are fighting to defend these technical and democratic bulwarks. Their main point hasn't changed in decades. Weaken encryption and you weaken everyone's security all the time. That hard technical fact keeps colliding with the political fantasy of a world without shadows. Even the tech industry is split. Apple puts up a public front of resistance, mixing principle with brand optics, while Microsoft and Google already cooperate broadly with authorities and see surveillance as a growth market. The fracture blunts any unified pushback. Civil society groups such as the Electronic Frontier Foundation, Access Now, EDRI, and La Quadrature du Net keep publishing reports, filing lawsuits, and sounding the alarm. Yet their voices struggle to cut through a debate flooded with emotion and security rhetoric. On the ground, workarounds are sprouting. Decentralized tools, anonymous networks, censorship-resistant systems. There will always be ways to dodge surveillance, and we can explain how to use them. But they remain niche and could be criminalized if the current bills pass. We're at a historic crossroads. The decisions made in the coming months will shape digital life for decades. Will we accept a world where every message is scanned, every behavior profiled, every misstep flagged? Or will we defend the technical, legal, and ethical principles that still safeguard our digital freedoms? The fight is just heating up. Denmark, which holds the Council presidency, has made chat control a top priority and wants member state agreement by October 2025. The ground is already shifting. Countries once skeptical are flipping. France, previously on the fence, now offers substantive support, while Germany, the last big holdout, is wavering. If these plans go through, Europe will become the first mass surveillance lab led by a democracy, and other regions will copy the playbook. What's on the line is way bigger than a single statute. It's an entire model of society. There's still time to say no, but the clock is ticking. History is crystal clear. Once a government grabs surveillance powers, it never gives them back. What's sold as an exception quickly normalizes, spreads, and solidifies. Today's fight against child sexual abuse morphs into tomorrow's war on terror, then into crackdowns on fraud or disinformation, while the machinery keeps grinding on. This is the moment to act. In a world of total monitoring, dissent, creativity, and freedom suffocate, leaving only conformity and fear. The question isn't whether we want to protect kids. Of course we do. The real question is, what kind of world do we want to hand them? One that's messy but free, where privacy remains a right, or a supposedly safe, automated, tightly controlled world where everyone lives under a permanent spotlight? The choice is still ours, but for how long?